In the heart of Texas, where the sun sets over endless plains and the wind carries stories of legends long past, one man faces the impossible choice between his pride and his family's legacy. Jake Thunder. Thornton was once the greatest bull rider the rodeo circuit had ever seen, until a devastating accident forced him to hang up his spurs forever. Now, 15 years later, with his father's ranch drowning in debt and foreclosure looming just days away, Jake must confront his deepest fears and broken dreams. The only solution: ride Diablo Negro, the most dangerous bull in rodeo history, in an unsanctioned competition where the prize money could save everything he holds dear. But this isn't just about 8 seconds on a bull's back. It's about redemption, sacrifice, and discovering whether a broken cowboy still has one more ride left in him. As the clock ticks down and his family's future hangs in the balance, Jake must decide. Will he risk everything for one final chance at glory, or watch generations of Thornton legacy disappear forever? The morning sun barely crept over the horizon when Jake Thornton stepped onto the creaking porch of the family ranch house, his coffee steaming in the cold autumn air. At 42 years old, his once powerful frame still carried the confidence of a champion, but his limp told a different story, one written in pain and regret. 15 years ago, when a bull named Crimson Fury ended his career in 3 violent seconds. The Thornton Ranch had stood for 4 generations, spanning 3,000 acres of prime Texas grazing land. Jake's great-grandfather had built it from nothing. His grandfather had expanded it during the boom years, and his father, Samuel Thornton, had fought to keep it alive through droughts, recessions, and changing times. Now, at 78, Samuel sat in his wheelchair on that same porch, staring at the foreclosure notice that had arrived yesterday with all the finality of a death sentence. 60 days, Samuel said quietly, his weathered hands trembling as he held the paper. 60 days and the bank takes everything. Jake felt his chest tighten. The debt had been accumulating for years: bad investments, failed crops, mounting medical bills from his mother's long illness before she passed. They'd managed to keep their heads above water, but barely. Then came last year's devastating drought, and the careful balance collapsed. $350,000. That's what they owed. An impossible sum for a struggling ranch. "We'll figure something out, Dad," Jake said, though his voice lacked conviction. They'd already sold off half the herd, mortgaged every building, and exhausted every loan option. There was nothing left to sell, nothing left to leverage. Samuel looked at his son with eyes that had seen too much disappointment. "You know there's only one way, Jake. I heard about it last week at the feed store. That unsanctioned rodeo over in El Paso, the one they call the Devil's Gambit. First prize is $500,000. Jake's jaw clenched. "You know I can't ride anymore, Dad," the doctor said. "I know what the doctor said 15 years ago," Samuel interrupted, his voice sharp with desperation. "I know what the doctors said 15 years ago." Samuel, what the doctors said 15 years ago, Samuel interrupted, his voice sharp with desperation. "I also know that Diablo Negro is the featured attraction, and no one's lasted more than 3 seconds on that monster. They're bringing in riders from all over the country, Jake. This is different from the regular circuit. This is our only chance." Jake turned away, gripping the porch railing so hard his knuckles went white. Diablo Negro. Even the name sent ice through his veins. The bull was legendary, a 2,000-pound nightmare that had injured more riders than any animal in modern rodeo history. The unsanctioned event was exactly what it sounded like, a gathering outside the official Rodeo Association S rules, where the most dangerous bulls met desperate riders willing to risk everything for prize money that legitimate competitions couldn't offer. Inside the house, Jake's daughter Emily emerged, her backpack slung over her shoulder, ready for school. At 16, she had her mother's fierce determination and Jake's stubborn pride. She'd heard everything through the open window. "Dad, "You can't seriously be considering this," she said, her voice cracking with fear. "You promised Mom before she died that you'd never ride again. You promised me." Jake felt the weight of that promise like a stone in his chest. His wife, Carolyn, had made him swear on her deathbed 3 years ago that he'd keep himself safe for Emily's sake. She'd lost her mother. She couldn't lose her father, too. "I'm not considering anything, sweetheart," Jake lied, pulling her into a hug. "Don't worry. We'll find another way." But as Emily's school bus disappeared down the dusty road and Samuel wheeled himself back inside, Jake stood alone on that porch and faced the truth he'd been avoiding. There was no other way. The ranch hands, Miguel, Tommy, and old Pete, depended on this place for their livelihoods. Emily's college fund had already been sacrificed to pay bills. Their entire world was collapsing, and he was the only one who could stop it. That afternoon, Jake found himself in the barn, standing before a locked trunk he hadn't opened in 15 years. Inside were his riding gear, his championship buckles, his rope, and his spurs, relics of a life he thought he'd left behind forever. His hand shook as he lifted out his old vest, still stained with dirt from that final, catastrophic ride. The pain in his leg throbbed as if in warning, a constant reminder of the titanium rod holding his femur together and the nerve damage that would never fully heal. But beneath the fear and the physical limitations, something else stirred, something he thought had died in that arena 15 years ago. The part of him that lived for the challenge, that thrived on the edge between control and chaos, that had made him a champion. It was still there, buried but not gone, whispering that maybe, just maybe, he had one more ride left in him. The drive to El Paso took Jake 3 days. He told Emily he was checking on potential buyers for some equipment, and he asked Miguel to look after the ranch. The lie tasted bitter, but he couldn't bear to see the fear in his daughter's eyes if she knew the truth. The unsanctioned rodeo operated in the shadows of the legitimate circuit. No safety regulations, no insurance requirements, no liability protection, just raw competition and desperate men willing to risk everything. Jake found the operation outside the city limits, in a sprawling private property owned by a wealthy collector of dangerous animals named Marcus Dalton. Dalton's reputation preceded him. The man had made his fortune in oil, then channeled his wealth into creating what many called blood sport for the modern age. His stable of bulls included the most dangerous animals ever bred for rodeo creatures too violent, too unpredictable for sanctioned events. Diablo Negro was his prized possession, an absolute monster that had sent 17 riders to the hospital in the past 2 years alone. The registration building was a converted warehouse where riders gathered, each one carrying their own story of desperation. Jake recognized some faces from his championship days, men who'd blown their winnings, destroyed their bodies, or simply never learned how to do anything but ride. Others were younger, hungry newcomers who thought they were invincible. "Jake Thornton," a voice called out from across the room. "I'll be damned. Heard you were done riding." Carlos Mendoza emerged from the crowd, a former rival who competed against Jake in his prime. Carlos walked with a cane now, his left arm hanging at an odd angle from a riding injury that had never healed properly. "I am done," Jake replied. "Just here to watch." Carlos laughed bitterly. "Sure you are. That's what they all say. Then they see the prize money and remember why they came." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping. "Don't do it, brother. I watched what Diablo Negro did to Tommy Rodriguez last month. Tommy was half your age and in perfect condition. That bull is different, like it knows how to hunt riders. It's not natural." Jake felt the weight of Carlos's warning, but his mind kept returning to the foreclosure notice, to Emily's future, to 4 generations of Thornton legacy about to disappear. The registration process was simple. Sign away all liability, provide emergency contact information, and pay a $5,000 entrance fee. Jake stared at the forms, his pen hovering over the signature line. $5,000 they couldn't afford to lose. But without it, they'd lose everything else anyway. He signed. That evening, Jake was allowed to observe the practice runs. The facility was impressive, a full-size arena with hospital-grade lighting and viewing platforms for Dalton's wealthy friends who came to watch desperate men risk their lives for entertainment. The atmosphere felt wrong, predatory, like the ancient Roman Colosseums where gladiators fought for the pleasure of the elite. Then they brought out Diablo Negro. The bull was massive, easily the largest Jake had ever seen. Its coat was pitch black except for red-tinged eyes that seemed to glow with malevolent intelligence. The animal moved with controlled power, each step deliberate, as if constantly calculating. When a younger rider attempted a practice run, Diablo Negro didn't just buck, it strategized. The bull would fake left, then spin right, using its horns not just randomly, but with precision, seeking to catch and injure its rider. The young man lasted 2.5 seconds before being thrown violently into the dirt. He left the arena on a stretcher, his arm bent at an impossible angle. Jake's leg throbbed in sympathetic pain. What was he thinking? He was 42 years old, with a rod in his leg and 15 years of rust. This wasn't bravery, it was suicide. That night, in a cheap motel room, Jake called home. Emily answered, her voice bright with teenage gossip about school. For 10 minutes, Jake listened to her talk about her day, about her friends, about her plans for the future, plans that required money they didn't have, stability they were about to lose. "I love you, sweetheart," Jake said when they hung up, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you too. Dad, are you okay? You sound weird." "I'm fine. Just tired from the road. I'll be home in a few days." After the call ended, Jake sat in the darkness, thinking about his father's desperate eyes, Emily's innocent dreams, and the ranch that represented everything his family had built. Then he thought about Diablo Negro's calculating intelligence and the hospital stretchers. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he spent hours watching old videos of his championship rides, studying his technique, remembering the feel of the rope in his hand and the explosive power between his legs. His body was older, damaged, but his mind still knew every movement, every adjustment, every split-second decision that separated champions from casualties. By dawn, Jake had made his decision. He would spend the next 3 weeks preparing, rebuilding his strength, retraining his reflexes, and studying everything available about Diablo Negro. He wouldn't just show up and hope for the best. If he was going to risk everything, he'd do it right. He called Miguel and asked him to keep the ranch running for another month. Then, he called an old friend who ran a training facility for professional riders and asked for help getting back into condition. The countdown had begun. Jake's training regime was brutal. Every morning began at 5. With physical therapy exercises designed to strengthen his damaged leg and restore flexibility he'd lost over 15 years of disuse. His body screamed in protest. Muscles that had settled into comfortable middle age were forced to remember their former power. His friend, Danny Cross, ran a private facility 2 hours outside El Paso where professional riders prepared for major competitions. Danny had been skeptical when Jake explained his situation, but one look at Jake's face told him arguing was useless. "You know this is crazy," Danny said, watching Jake struggle through his first day of conditioning. "Even if your body holds up, your reaction time isn't what it was. At 42, your nervous system just doesn't fire as fast. Then I'll have to be smarter instead of faster," Jake replied through gritted teeth. The mechanical bull at Danny's facility was state-of-the-art, programmable to mimic specific animals' movements. Danny had obtained footage of Diablo Negro and programmed the machine to replicate its patterns. Hour after hour, Jake practiced, studying the bull's tendencies, learning to anticipate its strategies. What he discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. Diablo Negro didn't just buck randomly, it followed patterns. tested riders, and adapted its strategy based on their weaknesses. The bull would start with standard bucks to gauge a rider's skill level, then escalate to its signature moves. A violent left spin followed by a sudden right turn designed to throw riders off balance, then a vicious backward kick that caught anyone trying to compensate. Jake's advantage was experience. Younger riders relied on reflexes and strength. Jake had to rely on anticipation and technique, staying loose when others tensed up, reading the bull's body language and positioning his weight to counteract the animal's movements before they fully developed. But 3 weeks into training, disaster struck. Jake was practicing an 8-second ride on the mechanical bull when his damaged leg gave out. The pain was instantaneous and overwhelming, shooting up from his old injury like lightning through his entire body. He collapsed on the mat, clutching his thigh as Danny rushed over. "That's it," Danny said firmly. "You're done. This injury proves you can't do this." Jake lay there, tears of frustration streaming down his face. The pain was one thing, but the fear of failure, of letting his family down, was unbearable. He thought about Samuel's disappointed eyes, about the ranch being auctioned off, about Emily's dreams evaporating. "Help me up," Jake said quietly. "Jake, you can't. Help me up." Danny reluctantly pulled him to his feet. Jake stood there, testing his leg, feeling the pain but also something else. The knowledge that he'd pushed too hard, tried to rely on strength he no longer possessed. That night, Jake had a long conversation with an old sports medicine specialist who'd worked with injured athletes. The doctor explained that Jake's problem wasn't just physical, it was psychological. He was trying to ride the way he had 15 years ago, using techniques designed for a younger, healthier body. "You need to reinvent your approach," the doctor explained. "Accept your limitations and find new advantages. Your injury means you can't power through certain movements, so you need to be more economical with your energy, more precise with your positioning. Think of yourself not as a damaged young rider, but as a completely different type of athlete." The advice was transformative. Jake stopped trying to recapture his youth and instead embraced his current reality. He developed a more conservative, controlled style, using minimal movement for maximum effect, conserving energy and relying on perfect positioning rather than brute strength. His practice times improved. More importantly, his leg stopped failing him because he stopped demanding impossible things from it. But then came the phone call that changed everything. Emily's voice was panicked when she called. "Dad, Grandpa had a stroke. He's in the hospital. They say it's serious. You need to come home right now." Jake's world stopped. He was 3 days away from the competition, 3 days from potentially saving the ranch. But his father was dying, and Emily needed him. He drove through the night, arriving at the hospital just before dawn. Samuel lay in the ICU, hooked to machines, his once strong body now frail and struggling. The doctors explained that the stress of the impending foreclosure had likely triggered the stroke. Samuel was stable but weakened, and the prognosis was uncertain. Jake sat by his father's bedside, holding his hand while Emily slept in a chair nearby. Samuel's eyes fluttered open briefly, focusing on his son. "The competition?" Samuel whispered, his speech slurred. Did you go?" "I'm here, Dad. That's what matters." "No," Samuel said with surprising force. "The ranch ... Emily's future." "You have to." He struggled for words, his frustration evident. "Rest now. We'll figure something out." But Samuel's eyes held a desperate plea. He knew there was no other option. The bank wouldn't wait for his recovery. The foreclosure was 20 days away, and the competition was in 3 days. Jake was trapped between two impossible choices: stay with his dying father and lose everything, or leave for the competition and potentially miss Samuel's final moments. The weight of that decision crushed him, and for the first time since this journey began, Jake broke down completely, his body shaking with silent sobs while his daughter and father slept. In the pre-dawn darkness of that hospital room, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the antiseptic smell of mortality, Jake Thornton faced the hardest truth of his life. Sometimes being a man means making choices where every option feels like failure. Samuel's condition stabilized over the next 24 hours. The doctors were cautiously optimistic he would survive, but his recovery would be long and difficult. Jake sat with Emily in the hospital cafeteria, both of them exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the past day. "Dad," Emily said quietly, pushing her untouched food around her plate. "I know about the competition." Jake's head snapped up. "What? How?" "Miguel told me." "He thought I knew." She looked at her father with tears streaming down her face. "I understand why you're doing this. I'm not a little girl anymore. I know how bad things are." Jake reached across the table and took her hand. I promised your mother." "I know what you promised," she interrupted. "But I also know Mom would understand. She'd be scared, but she'd understand." Emily took a shaky breath. "I'm scared too, Dad. I'm terrified of losing you. But I'm also scared of losing our home, of watching Grandpa's legacy disappear, of seeing you destroy yourself with guilt if you don't even try. Sweetheart, I can't ask you to give me permission for this." "You're not asking. I'm telling you." She squeezed his hand hard. "Go to the competition. Ride your best. And come home to us. Promise me you'll come home." Jake felt tears burning in his eyes. His 16-year-old daughter was being forced to grow up too fast, to make decisions no child should have to face. But there was steel in her voice, a strength that reminded him so much of Caroline. Before Jake could respond, Samuel's nurse appeared. "Mr. Thornton, your father is asking for you." In the ICU, Samuel was more alert than he'd been since the stroke. His speech was still slurred but determined. "I heard Emily," he said. "She's right. You have to go." "Dad, I can't leave you like this." "You can and you will," Samuel insisted, his old authority showing through despite his weakened state. "I didn't survive 78 years of life to watch my son give up on our family's legacy. You trained for this. You're ready. Now finish what you started. What if something happens while I'm gone? What if you... Then I'll die knowing my son fought for our family instead of sitting helplessly by my bedside," Samuel said firmly. "Jake, this ranch isn't just land and cattle. It's proof that the Thorntons don't quit. Your great-grandfather crossed an ocean with nothing. Your grandfather survived the Depression. Your mother and I made it through droughts and recessions. Now it's your turn to say what they built. Don't let fear stop you from being the man I raised." Jake looked between his father and daughter, seeing the same determination in both their faces. They were releasing him to do what needed to be done, giving him permission to take the risk, but also placing an enormous burden on his shoulders, the expectation that he would succeed, that he would save them all, and that he would survive. The drive back to El Paso was the longest of Jake's life. Every mile felt heavy with responsibility. Every hour brought him closer to the moment that would define his family's future. He called Danny and arranged to arrive at the facility a day early for final preparations. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. The injury that could paralyze or kill him. The possibility that even his best ride wouldn't be enough to win. The chance that Diablo Negro was simply unbeatable. But he also thought about what Carlos had said weeks earlier. That bull is different, like it knows how to hunt riders. What if he could turn that intelligence against the animal? Bulls that operated on pure instinct were dangerous but predictable. A bull that strategized, that adapted. That bull could potentially be outsmarted if a rider understood its patterns well enough. Jake spent the entire night studying footage of Diablo Negro, frame by frame, looking for Tell's subtle body language that preceded its movements, patterns in its decision-making, any advantage he could find. And slowly, he began to see something others had missed. Diablo Negro had a tell. Just before its signature spin combination, the bull's left ear would twitch slightly, a tiny muscular preparation that preceded the movement to maybe a third of a second. It wasn't much, but for a rider who knew what to look for, that fraction of a second could mean the difference between anticipating the movement and reacting too late. By dawn, Jake had a plan. It was risky, required perfect execution, and depended on his body holding together for 8 crucial seconds. But it was possible. Just barely possible. The competition was that evening. Registration opened at noon, preliminary rides began at 3, and the main event featuring Diablo Negro would happen at 8 o'clock under the arena lights. 20 riders had entered, each desperate, each believing they could be the one to conquer the unconquerable bull. Jake arrived at 6, wearing his old competition vest and the boots that had carried him to 3 national championships. His leg ached with familiar pain, but his mind was clear, focused on the task ahead. He went through his ritual preparation stretching, visualizing the ride, mentally rehearsing every second of what he needed to do. Marcus Dalton found him in the prep area. "Jake Thornton, I remember watching you ride in your prime. You were something special." Dalton's smile was predatory. "But that was a long time ago. Are you sure you want to do this?" "I'm sure," Jake replied evenly. "Good. Diablo Negro hasn't been properly challenged in months. It'll be good for him to face a real rider before he completely breaks them all." Dalton's casual cruelty was chilling, treating human suffering as entertainment. Jake said nothing, just continued his preparations. Around him, other riders nervously prepared, some praying, others drinking despite the rules, all of them grappling with their own fears and motivations. The preliminary rounds were brutal to watch. Young riders full of confidence were quickly humbled by bulls that, while dangerous, were nothing compared to Diablo Negro. Jake watched each ride carefully, noting which strategies worked and which failed, storing every piece of information that might give him an advantage. The arena lights blazed like a manufactured sun as 8 o'clock approached. The crowd, mostly wealthy spectators who'd paid thousands for the privilege of watching desperation disguised as entertainment, filled the stands with an energy that felt more like bloodlust than appreciation for athletic skill. Jake stood in the holding area, listening to the announcer build up the main event. Of the 20 riders who'd entered, only 8 had qualified to attempt Diablo Negro. The others had either been injured in preliminary rounds or had withdrawn after seeing what the featured bull did to its first challenger, a seasoned rider who lasted exactly 2.7 seconds before being thrown so violently he needed immediate medical attention. The qualifying riders would each get their attempt. The longest successful ride would win the $500,000 prize, with smaller prizes for second and third place. Successful was defined generously. Even 4 seconds would count, though no one seriously believed anyone would reach 8. Jake drew the 7th position. He watched as the first 6 riders approached the challenge, each bringing different strategies, different strengths, different hopes. The first rider, a muscular man from Oklahoma, tried to overpower the bull with strength. Diablo Negro threw him in under 2 seconds, sending him sprawling into the dirt with a dislocated shoulder. The second rider attempted speed and agility, but the bull's calculated movements anticipated every adjustment. 1.5 seconds. The third rider had studied the bull's patterns, much as Jake had, and managed a respectable 3.25 seconds before Diablo Negro deployed a move. Jake had never seen in any footage a rapid reversal that seemed physically impossible for an animal that size. The fourth and fifth riders fared even worse, both failing to reach 2 seconds. The sixth rider was Carlos Mendoza. Despite his injuries, despite his cane, Carlos had entered one final time. Jake watched his old rival climb onto Diablo Negro with shaking hands, and for 8 glorious seconds, 8 perfect seconds, Carlos danced with death itself. His technique was flawless, his timing impeccable, his courage absolute. At 7.8 seconds, Carlos's damaged arm gave out. He couldn't maintain his grip, and Diablo Negro, sensing the weakness, executed a violent spin that sent Carlos flying. He hit the ground hard and didn't move. The arena fell silent as medical staff rushed in. Jake felt his heart hammering as they carefully loaded Carlos onto a stretcher. His old friend's eyes were open, but pain twisted his face. As they carried him past Jake, Carlos managed to whisper, "Beat that monster. Do it for all of us who couldn't." Then it was Jake's turn. The walk to the bull felt like miles. Each step echoed with the weight of everything riding on the next 8 seconds. His father's legacy, Emily's future, the ranch, the family name, everything. Diablo Negro waited in the chute, its red-tinged eyes tracking Jake's approach with what seemed like malevolent intelligence. The bull knew. Somehow, it recognized that this was different, that this rider represented more than just another challenge to dominate. Jake climbed the chute rails, his damaged leg protesting every movement. Below him, Diablo Negro shifted, muscles rippling under black hide, raw power barely contained. The bull was enormous. Looking down at it from above made its size even more intimidating. "You sure about this, old man?" one of the chute workers asked, not unkindly. Jake didn't answer. He was already entering that mental space where only the ride existed, where pain and fear and consequence faded into singular focus. He'd been here before, in another lifetime, when his body was young and unbroken. The physical tools had changed, but the mind remembered everything. He positioned himself carefully, wrapping the rope around his hand with practiced precision. His legs gripped the bull's sides, feeling the animal's breathing, its tension, its readiness. This wasn't just an animal. Diablo Negro was an opponent, calculating and dangerous. Jake nodded to the gate operator. The chute exploded open. The first buck was a test, powerful but controlled. Diablo Negro gauging its rider's skill. Jake absorbed the impact through his core, letting his body move with the bull rather than against it, conserving energy. 1 second. The second buck came harder, a vicious upward thrust designed to break a rider's concentration. Jake anticipated it, shifting his weight fractionally left. 2 seconds. Then came the bull's signature move, the violent left spin. But Jake saw it coming, saw that tiny ear twitch that preceded the movement. He was already shifting his weight when Diablo Negro began its turn, staying centered, maintaining perfect form. 3 seconds. The bull sensed something was different. Its strategy wasn't working. Diablo Negro escalated, abandoning its usual patterns for pure chaos, random, explosive bucks that had no tell, no warning. 4 seconds. Jake's legs screamed in agony as the titanium rod in his femur protested the violent impacts. His grip on the rope was slipping, his strength fading. 5 seconds. Diablo Negro threw everything it had into the next sequence. A spin, a kick, a reversal, a jump. Movements flowing so fast they blurred together. Jake felt his body failing, felt his damaged leg giving out, felt the rope burning through his grip. 6 seconds. The crowd was roaring now, on their feet, sensing they were witnessing something historic. But Jake heard nothing. His entire world had collapsed to just him and the bull, to the burning in his muscles and the desperate need to hold on for 2 more seconds. 7 seconds. Diablo Negro made one final, desperate move, that physically impossible rapid reversal that had defeated the third rider. But Jake had seen it now, understood it, and instead of fighting it, he moved with it, letting the bull's momentum work with his positioning rather than against it. 7.5 seconds. Time slowed. Jake could feel his grip failing, could feel his body reaching its absolute limit. His leg was on fire, his arm was numb, his vision was starting to blur. But the buzzer hadn't sounded yet. Not yet. Hold on. Just hold on. 8 seconds. The buzzer blared. Jake barely heard the buzzer through the roaring in his ears. His body moved on pure instinct, releasing the rope and pushing away from Diablo Negro as the bullfighters rushed in to distract the animal. He hit the ground hard, his leg immediately giving out, sending him sprawling into the dirt. For a moment, he just lay there, unable to process what had happened. Then hands were helping him up. Danny had rushed down from the stands along with medical staff. The crowd's noise finally penetrated his consciousness. They were going absolutely wild. Everyone on their feet. The sound overwhelming. "You did it!" Danny was shouting, tears streaming down his face. 8.2 seconds. "You beat him. You actually beat him." Jake looked back at the chute where Diablo Negro was being secured. The bull stood there, sides heaving, and for just a moment, their eyes met. There was no victory in that gaze, no defeat, just recognition between two old warriors who'd given everything they had. Marcus Dalton appeared, his expression unreadable. "In 20 years of running these events, I've never seen anything like that. The way you read that bull, anticipated its moves, that was masterful." He pulled out a check, already prepared. $500,000, as promised. "You earned every penny." Jake took the check with shaking hands, staring at the number that represented his family's salvation. All the pain, all the risk, all the fear, it had been worth it. The Thornton Ranch was saved. The medical staff insisted on examining him immediately. His leg injury had been aggravated but not catastrophically worsened. Bruised ribs, strained muscles, a partially torn rotator cuff painful but treatable. He'd be in physical therapy for months, but he'd survive. More importantly, he'd won. Carlos was waiting in the medical tent, his arm in a fresh cast but his spirit unbroken. "I knew you could do it, brother. I knew someone could finally beat that devil. You almost had it," Jake replied. "If your arm hadn't given out." "But it did," Carlos interrupted with a sad smile. "That's life. Our bodies fail us, but that doesn't mean we stop fighting." He gestured to the check. "What's next for you?" "Home," Jake said simply. "My family's waiting." The drive back to the hospital felt surreal. Jake kept touching the check in his pocket, making sure it was real, that this wasn't some pain-induced hallucination. He called Emily from the road, his voice breaking as he told her he'd won. "Dad, I knew you could do it," she said, crying and laughing at the same time. "Grandpa's been asking about you every hour. He's going to be so proud." Jake arrived at the hospital just before dawn, limping heavily but carrying himself with a peace he hadn't felt in years. Samuel was awake, alert, the news of Jake's victory having somehow reached him through the hospital grapevine. "You saved us," Samuel whispered, gripping Jake's hand with surprising strength. "You saved the ranch. We saved it together," Jake replied. "You taught me never to quit, never to back down from what's right. That's what carried me through." Over the following weeks, as Samuel recovered and the foreclosure was canceled, the story of Jake's ride spread through the rodeo community. Many called it the greatest 8 seconds in rodeo history, not because of the technical difficulty, but because of what it represented. A man past his prime, with a shattered body and impossible odds, succeeding through sheer determination and refusing to accept defeat. The ranch was saved, but more than that, Jake discovered something he thought he'd lost 15 years ago, his sense of purpose. He began working with injured riders, teaching them how to adapt their techniques, how to find new strengths when old ones failed. His story became a beacon for anyone who'd been told they were finished, that their best days were behind them. Emily got her college fund back. Samuel made a full recovery. The ranch hands kept their jobs. 4 generations of Thornton legacy remained intact. And every evening, Jake would stand on that familiar porch, looking out over the land his great-grandfather had claimed, his grandfather had expanded, his father had fought to keep, and that he had saved. His riding days were over. The damage to his leg from that final ride ensured he'd never compete again. But Jake felt no regret. He'd proven that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about facing your fears and doing what needs to be done anyway. He'd shown Emily that sometimes the greatest victories come from our darkest moments. That family is worth fighting for, and that legends aren't born. They're made in those critical seconds when everything hangs in the balance. Diablo Negro was retired from competition shortly after Jake's ride, Marcus Dalton finally recognizing that the bull had given everything it could. Jake heard that the animal was moved to a sanctuary where it could live out its days in peace. He hoped it was true. They'd both earned their rest. On quiet nights, when his leg ached and the memories surfaced, Jake would think about those 8 seconds, the longest and most important of his life. He'd faced his fears, pushed past his limitations, and discovered that being a hero doesn't require perfection. Sometimes it just requires showing up, doing your best, and refusing to quit until the buzzer sounds. The Thornton Ranch endured, as it always had, built on sacrifice, courage, and the unwavering belief that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. And somewhere in the barn, locked in that old trunk, Jake's riding gear waited no longer relics of the past, but proof that legends never truly die. They just wait for the moment when they're needed most, then rise one final time to save what matters most.